Now, the measure, as I said before, is a measure of classroom instruction. It's a teacher self-report measure, and it's currently under development in 3 states. The software tool has been finalized and is operational, but at this point, we're looking forward to collecting data in Arizona, South Carolina, and Pennsylvania. We're specifically looking at the quantitative indices that come out of the measure, called MyILogs, and see how those indices relate to student achievement. In addition, we collect data on the procedural fidelity and the reliability of the teacher reports. And for that purpose, we have classroom observations scheduled in all 3 states. Before I get into the tool, how it looks like, what data it collects, and how it would possibly be factoring into a model of evaluating teacher effectiveness, I want to spend a quick minute on this concept called opportunity to learn. The measure is specifically designed to measure the degree of opportunity to learn. In this model behind me, you see a curriculum framework that we've developed. It is based on a long line of research on this concept, which goes about 5 to 6 decades back. John Carroll's model of school learning began with the concept of opportunity to learn. And essentially, this rich body of literature is concerned with the opportunities that schools provide students to learn what is expected of them. In the current framework, what is expected of students is prescribed by the general curriculum, or sometimes referred to as the intended curriculum. So these are the subject and grade-specific academic content and performance standards. In direct alignment with the intended curriculum, we developed the assessed curriculum. Now, these are the state achievement tests that you use for accountability purposes, and they sample across the content domains of the intended curriculum. Now, researchers for the past 50 and 60 years have worried about the extent to which students are exposed to the content of the intended curriculum, and therefore ultimately to the content that's being assessed. Depending on whether you're coming from the policy realm or you're more in curriculum and instruction, you worry about operationalizing and measuring this concept at different levels. As you can see, up at the top is the system level, and policy researchers typically have focused on OTL at the standards level. What's the breadth and depth of the content standards in your particular state or countries across the world? Now, we are more interested in being as proximal to the instructional lives of students as possible. So we are thinking that if you want to intervene and increase opportunity to learn, you should look at the access point. And for students with and without disabilities, that is the teacher classroom instruction. That is, first and foremost, you have access to the intended curriculum through classroom instruction. In reviewing the literature, there's essentially 3 key dimensions that researchers have focused on. They have typically focused on each dimension separately and for a sustained period of time. Time is a big one. You've probably heard of the concept called academic learning time. Content, in the last few years since NCLB, researchers like Andy Porter, John Smithson, Norman Webb, have focused on the content alignment between what you do at the classroom level and how it is aligned with the state content standards. And then there's quality. Quality indicators for classroom instruction have been around since the 80s. Evidence-based instructional practices have been established for various content areas. And what we were trying to do in the research project that we have at hand in the 3 states is get a measure of opportunity to learn that gets at all 3 dimensions simultaneously. First and foremost, because that's how we think classroom instruction unfolds for teachers. You have to spend some time, and during that time you can enact content that is either very aligned with the academic content standards or very poorly aligned with the academic content standards. On top of this, you could use very few instructional, evidence-based instructional practices or a lot of them. Now, I should preface that any time you measure classroom instruction, you inevitably leave something out. It's a very complex phenomenon, and no measure can do it all. We try to get at very crude dimensions of classroom instruction because we intended for it to be evaluated on an ongoing basis with formative benefits for teachers. So the tool is called the Instructional Learning Opportunities Guidance System. The information you will get from MyILogs is the coverage of the state-specific subskills, the time you spend on each subskill, the cognitive expectations you layer on these subskills. They're very similar to Bloom's taxonomy And if you're familiar with some measures of classroom instruction, such as the SEC or the teacher logs that are used in Michigan, these are cognitive demands. Again, you will see some examples later on. The use of evidence-based instructional practices, grouping formats, and last but not least, the teacher's perceived engagement of their students in the class. The calendar is the main part of this tool. I should say that from the beginning, we intended for this tool to be used by teachers even after we left. So that means it's not just there to give us the data we need on time, content, and quality, but it's supposed to be used on an ongoing basis to change instruction. So I'll talk about the calendar in a little bit in more detail. But what do you get out of this if you complete this on a daily basis? You get about a dozen instructional reports, and you can access them online about 4 weeks after you've started using the system. This is one of the crude reports. It's simply a cumulative measure of the skills you've covered so far. If you taught it for about 20 minutes, it counts as having been taught. This teacher here did it for 4 quarters, covered about 80% of all the subskills. This is here in Pennsylvania. Again, it's a tool to be used for reflection purposes. So you may have good reasons why you didn't cover the other 20%. Maybe your students already knew the content, or you said, well, it's not part of the assessed curriculum, so therefore I'm not going to teach it. Here is a pie chart that breaks up the entire time that you have spent on instruction for math. In fact, you spend about 30% of your instruction on number and operations. Again, maybe this emphasis is proper. You can go down into number and operations and look at the various subskills. In Pennsylvania, you have this amount. In other states, this could be twice as many subskills. Teachers use this very frequently. This is a breakdown of all the skills you've taught so far in minutes, hours, and cumulative percentages. You can actually, besides the broad content areas, bore down on the subskills. And what teachers are most interested in are actually the skills they haven't taught. As they move on, about 6 months into the school year, it becomes very challenging to recall how much time did I really spend at the beginning of the school year on this particular subskill. You can see, oops, let me go back. You can see that several skills weren't taught at all, such as conversion, and the other ones were barely touched upon. You can also report at the individual student level. That's an important distinction from other classroom measurement tools, that we can examine opportunity to learn at the classroom level and at the student level. This is particularly important for us in special education because we want to know to what extent you differentiate your instruction. So you can see right here that for the classroom level, you have spent most of your time on understand and apply. When it comes to James, right over here, he received significantly less time in understand and apply. In fact, you emphasized the recall expectation much more for James. And another curious fact is that while you have about 7% that's not on instruction, you could have a school assembly, there may be reasons why you don't have time on instruction, but for James it was 25%. Maybe he's absent a lot, but clearly you can see it affects all the other cognitive processes that you layer upon your instruction for James. The tool itself features a list of state-specific subskills. So the intended curriculum is always specific to that particular state. Other measures like the SEC have general curriculum frameworks. This one is always specific for the state. We could also load into core academic content standard or intervention curricula that are particularly important. At the bottom, you can't see it right here, is an extra bar that allows you to enter custom skills. So if you're a special education teacher, you can indicate any academic content objectives that are not part of the intended curriculum, but are nonetheless important for that particular student. You simply drag and drop the standards onto the calendar and then indicate the amount of time you plan to teach this. Teachers use this to plan their instruction for the entire week, and at the end of the day, they come back and report whether it happened the way they had planned it. On certain day, you get this little symbol here, right over here, that tells you that you need to report class and student details. We use a sampling process for about 20 days. This allows us to reliably differentiate between the instructional content teachers deliver. And you break down your time allocation for a particular skill according to these cognitive process dimensions. And there is a list of evidence-based instructional practices as well as other ones. This list can be customized to your liking or the particular district's liking. And lastly, we report on student engagement as well as goal attainment. So what information are we presently gathering? Well, we gather information on the degree to which you enact content along the time, content and quality dimension. We provide teacher formative feedback that they can use to change their instruction. We can gather data on the degree to which you differentiate instruction, and it supports instruction at the planning and implementation stage. And one important aspect is that we support communication amongst key instructional personnel. When it comes to students with disabilities, you may receive math instruction from several teachers. You may be in a classroom where it's co-taught, but then twice a week you may have a pull-out scenario where you get additional minutes and content related to math. When you think about using observations as a tool to get information on classroom instruction, you always have to worry about to what extent you can reliably generalize from those instances. There's several research studies done on this challenge when it comes to reading, for example. Reading doesn't just happen during the scheduled block of reading. It happens through many other subjects. This tool is used on a daily basis. Where does the future go? Well, we never intended this tool to be used as part of teacher evaluation. So why we're here? Well, teachers brought up to us last year in the pilot study, you know what, this is a really fair way of being evaluated. Not exclusively, but it should be part of the formula that you use to evaluate us, because it goes back to one of the core functions that we have to fulfill as a teacher, and that is teach what is expected of our students to be learned by the end of the school year. And they also thought that if you would come back to them and say, well, your kids are not making AYP, what's going on in your classroom? You could show the data and say, well, this is what I'm doing. Other suggestions have been to couple this information with assessment data. That is, at the end of a month of your enacted instruction, the computer would generate a test based on what you have taught. So you can check not only what you've taught, but to what extent students have retained that information. Here's a couple of other suggestions, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on how this could be used in the context of teacher evaluation. Some studies have been done on this notion, and generally the concern is that if you use a high-stakes context, it does corrupt the data. I'm almost up here, so one last thought. Teachers said, yeah, we understand that teachers may be concerned about the accuracy of how we report this. But first of all, it's meaningless data if it's not filled out accurately. And secondly, you have to come and observe me anyway, so why don't you use this information, log onto my system, see what I'm doing, and if you confirm for 5 or 6 observations that I indeed do what I say I do, then maybe this could receive its full weight, and depending on how the discrepancy happens, you could change that weight. Again, this was just a suggestion by a teacher in South Carolina, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this measure. Thanks.
Good morning, or almost afternoon, as Brad pointed out. My name is Punita Thurman. I'm the Executive Director of Human Capital Development with Fort Worth ISD. We have an opportunity this afternoon to share with you about our journey in designing and launching a pilot program around Pay for Performance that Fort Worth ISD embarked on almost 3 years ago. And my hope is that we can share the lessons, or that I can share the lessons that we learned along the way, and to talk about our program as you all are embarking in this work. As we started this journey, I told the team that was working on this often, let's look wide and far about what others are doing so that we can learn from their mistakes, because we are guaranteed to make our own, and there's no need to sort of replicate that. So in that spirit, we welcome the opportunity to talk to you about our program here in Fort Worth, and this is a highlight of that, a presentation that we will do in more detail this afternoon. Let me tell you a little bit, let me start by sharing a little bit about Fort Worth. It's typical of any large urban district. We have about 81,000 students, 73% of whom are free and reduced lunch, 85% of whom are minority, and we face all of the same kinds of challenges that other urban districts do across the nation. When the superintendent joined in 2004, early in her tenure, she convened a task force to explore the idea of pay for performance, and not in the context of how, but should we do this? And to Brad's point, really wanting to gauge interest and intent in designing a program that would be relevant to Fort Worth. There were about 34 38 people on that task force. It met probably every other month and for about 18 months and came up with no solid recommendations or direction. At the same time, the state had invested in money to let campuses individually experiment with this idea of pay for performance. We had 26 different campuses that designed a model at the campus level. About 400 teachers were paid an average payout of about $1,800, and we saw very little impact in terms of moving student achievement. And to couple it off, the state legislature, in their wise wisdom, put about $178 million aside for districts to experiment with the idea of pay for performance. And so you can just imagine the level of exhaustion, I think, in the district thinking about this idea for pay for performance. And this, based on how the money was allocated, we had an opportunity to be given $5 million to develop every year for 3 years, if all we could do is come up with a plan and get our board to approve it in about 4 months. So you can imagine the challenge that we had in front of us. And so as we started down this journey of how do we get there, I give very specific and due credit to a leader in our employee organization who told me very frankly, I am not coming to a single meeting. I will have not one more conversation with you unless you can explain to me why we want to do this. And that sparked a very important and critical step in the process, because I don't really think we had had enough exploration of what were we really trying to achieve in measuring and paying teachers. And so I wanted to start with you in terms of talking about the district's strategic interest in pursuing this. And this wasn't an easy list to really come about. We had known that lots of districts were looking at pay for performance, but given where Fort Worth was and what our goals and aspirations were in terms of very specific goals set by the board, investments that we had made, what was it that we were trying to accomplish? And it sparked some very rich and contentious but really meaningful conversations with our teacher union, with teachers, with the cabinet, with executive staff, with principals about if we have this money, what would we really want to focus on? And this is where we started. We came up with a very clear goal of needing to retain teachers at our hardest to staff schools. We have some schools where turnover is almost nil, and we have other schools that are challenged academically, and it's a revolving door of teachers, which we all know is a challenge. In that same vein, we knew we had to really think strategically about recruiting teachers to come to the schools that were hard to staff, and where we had in specific critical shortage areas like every school and district across the nation, and looking at secondary math and science and bilingual teachers. And so whatever we designed needed to affect the idea of recruiting and retention around not just any teacher, but highly effective teachers in the places that we needed them to be the most. At the same time, as we started to look at models across the state, we also came to a consensus that what we needed to be sure that this model did was in fact encourage collaboration and cooperation. We had spent 3 years and many millions of dollars in really breaking down silos and wanting teachers to work together to improve student achievement. We had looked at academic teaming, we had looked at common planning time, we had looked at using the IFL learning, principles of learning, and the last thing that we wanted to do was to create a system that would have the unintended consequence of taking teachers back into just thinking about what they did with their 30 students, because we were aligning money around that. And so the model that we had to come up with had to promote this idea of cooperation and collaboration, because that was very important to where we were as a district strategically. Second, there was a wide degree of understanding that what we wanted to do was really focus our measurement and reward system around progress and growth. And this is something that resonated immediately with teachers in terms of really getting a sense of getting credit, if you will, for moving student achievement, even if they were not hitting the arbitrary standards that were set by NCLB and the state standards. And teachers, they may not have understood the complex SAS value-added metric and what all went into EVOS, but in concept, the idea of being rewarded for accelerating student growth was one that teachers, especially in these hard-to-staff and challenging academic environments, welcomed overwhelmingly. And finally, just an acknowledgement that as we looked at our traditional teacher salary scale, it was tightly compressed. And although we have one of the highest starting salaries, both in the state and comparatively across the nation, it's a very tight compression between what you can earn as a first-year teacher and after 30 years, if you stay in the classroom, what you can earn. And so again, as we've heard others talk about really wanting to provide some differentiated compensation to keep our best teachers in the classroom. All of this, I think, starting with crystallizing this and really getting clarity about what we wanted the program to do, meant that we were able to design a program that very intentionally addressed these needs. And it also gave us the opportunity to crystallize our communication in sharing with people why we were doing this. So we have a set of guiding principles that we use every time we talk to teachers about this program, and we start with that to give them and ourselves a sense of why we ever started down this path in the first place. So what we ended up coming up with was a pilot program at 15 of our schools, 9 of which were at schools that both got rewards and incentives. And to make a big distinction between the idea of rewards and incentives. Teachers said, you are insulting me if you think I'm going to work harder because you put $5,000 more on the table. And so the language is very intentional to talk about rewards and incentives separately. Rewards are financial, and we look at them in 4 different mechanisms for rewarding teams of teachers. There's not a single reward mechanism that teachers can earn independently by what they do with their own teachers. And we talked about incentives truly as a mechanism for motivation. So what we want to demotivate teachers to take on assignments they would not otherwise take on. And that meant both financial incentives that were market aligned in terms of a math and science teacher at the high school level had a higher level of reward because they were just harder to find than an elementary teacher. And at the same point, we heard loud and clear from teachers that it wasn't just money. It was going to take huge improvements in working conditions. And so the board dedicated an additional $5 million to this program. So it's a $10 million program every year to really improve working conditions. And we took this based on what teachers said they wanted or would find appealing, what principals said, and what we wanted to really drive. But those improvement in working conditions were a huge investment. So there are, very quickly, and we will cover this more this afternoon, there are 4 ways in the PEAK model to earn rewards. The first is a campus reward. We set up a campus scorecard, and if 6 of the 12 cells show growth, every instructional professional on that campus has an opportunity to earn $2,000. The second is wanting those teams of teachers at the grade content level to really work together. So if all of the 6th grade students show exceptional growth in math, then all of the teachers who teach 6th grade math have an opportunity to earn $3,000 to $4,000. Similarly, because we had made all those investments in academic teaming, if we see growth across all content areas within a grade, then all teachers who teach 6th grade would earn an additional level of reward. And in the same line of thought, we wanted to encourage that idea of vertical articulation. And so if teachers across grade levels in a content area showed growth, then all of the teachers in that content area would earn an additional reward. Teachers had an opportunity to earn $13,000 across all of these, which is more than the principal. Principals were only eligible for a $10,000 reward. And we, in addition, showed an additional bonus for placement, advanced placement, which didn't just reward advanced placement teachers, but acknowledged the fact that if a student was performing at advanced placement in their 12th grade year, it's also based on what the 9th grade teachers were doing and the 10th grade teachers were doing in building that foundation. So again, being able to identify clearly what we wanted to achieve very much influenced the design and the model that we rolled out. And it's a very clear connection for teachers to be able to understand what we were trying to do and how it then showed up in this model, which really helped us in our ability to gain their support in moving forward. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time going through the lessons learned. I'd be glad to talk with you. We wear many of those wounds that any of you who have endeavored down this path have in terms of trying to figure out how to do this. But I do think we've seen some great signs of success in terms of improvements in campus climate culture, what teachers are saying, the retention rates, as well as, thank goodness, student achievement in those schools. And there are things that we will continue to work on as we go forward and try to evolve and learn from this process in terms of thinking about individual evaluations, in terms of thinking about what of these elements we can afford and should expand to other schools. But it is an ongoing process. Thank you.
I'm Joanne Taylor, and I work with a pilot program in the Austin Independent School District called REACH. I do lots of things within that program, and I want to give you just a little bit of context about the program and then talk specifically about the student learning objective process. Our program was developed and we started piloting 4 years ago, and it was developed collaboratively with the business community, teachers, principals, our teacher organizations, and administrators in the district. All came together on a task force, created some things, and as we've gone through this process, we've kept that group of people, or at least the same kinds of people, together to help guide the process. So as we've made revisions and changes, all of those stakeholders have been involved, and I think that's really important. Our program has morphed a bit, and this year, instead of having 3 strands, we have 5 strands, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. First, we have student growth, which has the student learning objectives, an individual and a team SLO, and I'm going to talk about those specifically in a minute. We also have a campus-wide award that we're calling a basket of measures because we can't come up with a better name. We have 4 categories that campuses will choose from. They have a category that's based on our state assessment, a category based on college and career readiness, a category of their own choice of something that they think is important for them as a campus, and then we have a value-added category that we're working on, developing. Campuses will put those together and have them approved by their associate superintendent, and that will be what their campus-wide award is based on this year. We also have a strand called professional growth, where we're offering professional development units to teachers. It's where a team of teachers come together, they identify a problem of practice, they figure out how they're going to solve that problem, what they're going to study, and they implement that in their classrooms and then show how it's impacted student growth. I'm going to talk more about that this afternoon in my breakout session. We also have a mentoring program. We have 27 full-release mentors that work with 8 to 10 new teachers in their first, second, or third year of service. They spend all of their time helping those new teachers become better. It's an incredible program, and it probably has the most support of all of the programs that we have, and I will talk a little bit about that this afternoon. We also have a new category called Leadership Pathways. We know that our mentors came into that job as a way to become a leader on a campus, and so they can go through that application process. We also have what we call SLO facilitators. They're sort of like the first responders on campus that can answer those questions. They get additional training to help them answer those questions and help with that SLO process. We also have PDU facilitators that guide 2 cohorts of teams through the process of doing a PDU. We also have a category for evaluation, and this year is a planning year for us as we determine how we're going to evaluate teacher effectiveness. So many of the conversations that we've heard have been very timely for us. And finally, we have a hard-to-staff recruitment and retention category. We're working on what the hard-to-staff categories are going to be, but our recruitment and retention stipends are based solely on how long a teacher has been at a specific campus. If you've been at a campus for 1, 2, or 3 years, you get $1,000, and if you've been there 4 or more years, you get $3,000. So that's sort of the overview of the entire program. And within that, we have the student learning objectives. There are 2 objectives that teachers are going to set for a year. They set one for themselves and their students. They can choose to target a specific group of kids. They can choose to use all their kids in a course. They have a lot of choice in that individual student learning objective. And then there's a team SLO, where they come together and have a common assessment that they give all the students and combine into one growth target. So we have 2 different levels of objectives now. This is the first year we've done that. Previously, we've had 2 individual objectives, and we're going to see how that works to have teachers working collaboratively and building that experience on developing assessments. That is based on the data that they see happening with their students and on their campus expectations and their campus improvement plan. They target specific things that they want their students to improve on and how much that they're going to improve by the end of the year. And we encourage a lot of collaboration. The more collaboration, the better. We found that when teachers work together, we get better things. We really wanted teachers to have a feeling of ownership in this process. We wanted them to be the ones to make decisions about what they were going to do in their classrooms. And we wanted to really help them figure out ways to align with the campus and district expectations within their own classrooms. Oftentimes, that campus improvement plan kind of got put on the shelf and was just a dusty document that nobody looked at. But we wanted to make that a little more relevant to what teachers were doing. So what does the process look like? We have a needs assessment. So teachers go through and they figure out, what is it that I want to work on specifically? What is it that I need to do to help my students be better by the end of the year? I'm going to take those areas and then line those up with my state standards. What is it that I'm supposed to be teaching and how am I supposed to be teaching it? And then turning that into a statement of improvement for the year. My students will be able to do, and then they name the skill by the end of the year. That's pretty much the easy part. The next parts are a little bit harder. The assessment is either finding an assessment or creating an assessment that will work to measure that SLO over the year. So we have a lot of issues when it comes to assessment. We don't have a lot of resources, and they're not allowed to use our standardized tests for the state or our benchmarks because they're not aligned to show growth from the beginning to the end. So what we ask them to do is really think about what makes a good assessment, and that's something we've really been focusing on this year is what makes a good assessment, and creating a valid assessment that will help them show growth in their students through the year. Once they've given that assessment to their students, they look at that data and they create a growth target. 80% of my students will improve by 2 rubric levels, or 80% of my students will improve by 35 points, depending on how the test was given. Once that's done, they submit it. It goes to their principal. Their principal can say yes or no, yes, it looks good, or no, it needs to go back in some revisions. And once that happens, it comes to our office. In the past, we looked at every single SLO to make sure that it met our standard. We realized that as we go forward, that's not possible. There aren't enough people to look at all of those. We looked at 1,000 teachers' SLOs last year, so it's 2,000 SLOs, and it took us about 3 months. We realized that as we go forward, we just can't do that. So this year, we've included an incentive for principals, that 80% of their teachers have to meet the standard of the sample that we pull from their campus in order for them to get their incentive. So we're hoping that that's going to help improve the quality of the SLOs and the oversight that goes on. Some campuses are very good about it, and others are a little more lax, and we're hoping that's going to help with that process. Once that process is done and teachers give their post-assessments at the end of the year, we do an end-of-the-year audit where we pull a 95% confidence interval sample so that we can see if the fidelity of the program is being upheld. And if we see that there is something wrong in the SLO, we will overturn that and the teacher will not receive payment. So what have we done well and what do we need to work on? Well, we've really done a good job of providing some campus-based training. Our team goes out to campuses. We spend all day on a campus helping teachers figure these things out, helping them look at data, helping them figure out what makes a good assessment. We go out 3 times during the year. So we really spend a lot of intensive time working with teachers, helping them figure these things out. And the teachers love it. They love the fact that the PD comes to them and they don't have to go to the PD. They're not having to take a day off to go and get PD. They can come before school, during lunch, after school, during their conference period, whatever works best for them. We've included all teachers, so elective area teachers, special ed teachers are all included in this process. We've really encouraged some teacher growth in their professional practice and helped them to think about what kind of reflection they need to be doing as they go through the year. What are some of our big challenges? We have limited assessment tools. We know that we can build capacity for teachers to provide good assessments, but it's really hard sometimes. An item bank would be really helpful, and so we are looking into ways that we can help provide those tools for them. Our data and collection systems are woefully inadequate most of the time. Like Houston, as Carlos said yesterday, no data warehouse. We finally have one, but it's not all put together yet, and everything isn't connected, so you can't just go in and look up that information easily. And right now, they're having issues where things don't want to work together, and so pulling data has become even more complicated. And when we do our payouts, it's all done through Excel sheets. So everything is done by hand in that way, and so it's crazy that we do that. And we know that we make mistakes because there's no way that you can look at 2,000 people and actually get every single thing correct. So that's one of our big challenges, is looking at what kind of software is available that will help us make a better system. Embedding practice into campus culture is probably the biggest challenge we face. Principals who buy into this process and who use it as a tool to help their teachers get better have great success. Campuses where the principal is sort of like, oh, this is just something extra that we do, or I have all of these mandates and you have to do it my way, there's no other way to do it, we find that those are the campuses where the teachers are most resistant to doing things. And so really finding a way for principals to embrace this as a tool, as a vehicle to embrace change and growth with teachers is a challenge. Finally, the common assessment versus the teacher-developed assessment. Having that common assessment across campuses is really valuable. We had a group come together this summer who said, we're going to have these teachers come together. They created an assessment. We had someone in curriculum vet it, and we created common assessments across the elementary math grade levels. So we have those available now. But having that teacher-developed assessment is a pushback from the community. Probably the biggest challenge that I can say that's not on the slide is aligning within the district and getting those district expectations and the curriculum on board. We're an unproven program at the beginning, and we're starting to show some results. We're starting to see that over time, if teachers use this in a vertical way and they align themselves, that we can see some incredible results. But it's sparse right now because it takes time to show that these things work. And so getting your administration on board at the beginning is very important. I'm going to talk more about all of these things this afternoon, so please come see me. And thank you all very much.
So I hope you found that as intriguing as I did. The title of this presentation was about innovative programs, things that are beginning to push the envelope. I hope that there are one or two questions that we can line up. As we're lining the questions up, I'm going to take the moderator's privilege and ask two questions. The first question is going to go to Gary and Alex. The second is going to go to Punita and Joanne. In the first question, I want us to think about how we move the culture of continuous improvement that Commissioner Webb talked about down to the classroom level. As I listened to Gary and as I listened to Alex describe what they did, I saw programmatic interventions. And what I want them to do is to now think, okay, what does this look like when you enact it classroom by classroom? And what kinds of changes will you see? Not on the margins of the teaching performance bell curve, and not as we inform high-stakes decisions, but frankly, as we do the sleeves rolled up, really heavy work of taking teachers through in the middle portion of the bell curve and advancing their performance and advancing the results that they get with students. And I'll let you guys duke it out to see who goes first.
For 40 years, Gallup has preached to its education clients that measurement improves performance. And with the Gallup student poll, I think for the first time, we have the ability to measure some things that are absolutely critical.
Into the mic.
We're able to measure some things that are absolutely critical with the Gallup student poll. It does get down to the classroom level, and it does get to the principal level. And what we found is that the Gallup student poll is a wonderful instrument for principals and staff members to sit down with and begin to take a look at from the standpoint of what are our students saying about our school. And from there, then begin to plan interventions around those situations. One of the things that we see repeatedly, and we'll talk about it this afternoon, is that if you begin to look at the data around over now 450,000 students that have gone through the Gallup student poll in the short period we've had it out, what we see is that 7th grade through 10th grade, there's a horrible dip. And what it calls into question is what is happening at the middle school level around both hope and engagement that we need to really begin to deal with in a very, very concrete kind of way. We ask questions in terms of, do you feel safe at this school? And safety comes out not only in terms of, do I feel physically safe, but do I also feel safe to ask questions that need to be answered inside of class itself. So it goes very, very deep.
Programmatic intervention. So far, we've been approached by school districts in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, and their notion of using this tool is clearly enveloped in professional development. They said, we have, at the system level, developed lots of curriculum information about our content standards. We have videos, we have instructional items. What is missing right now is the link between these resources and what's happening in the classroom. We have no way of knowing whether teachers actually access that information. In fact, when I was a teacher, I was just giving a big, giant book that said, here are the content standards, deal with them. And Pennsylvania right now is linking their resources to our system. That means if you go to the Subskills under Number and Operations, you can click on curriculum information, and you can get instructional videos, you can get example assessment items, as well as other resources that come around it. And in Massachusetts, we're trying to build in this tool around an entire professional development initiative that starts at the very beginning, would allow teachers to curriculum map out the entire school year, and then also the usage of their instructional resources that they've developed at the system level.
Thanks. Let's now take the question and turn it on its head. We heard both in Fort Worth and in Austin what things look like when they're enacted primarily at the classroom and schoolhouse level. And the question that I want to push both Punita and Joanne to think about is, what is your district's theory of action, and what would success look like? And how will you know that it's the program that you're operating that is creating that kind of success? So it's not so much a question of program evaluation, it's really a question of policy validation. How do you know that the policy you put into effect that has created this change in practice is making the difference? Who wants to go first?
I will. You know, that's a very timely question, because being second, I mean, we're entering our third year of this pilot, and we're in financial exigency, and as you raise, this is a very expensive program. And we are trying to identify which elements of this program. Is it the incentives? Is it the improvements in working conditions? Is it the rewards that we're paying at the end? But really taking a hard look, and we're not finding any very easy answers, because it is very hard to decouple, in terms of what really is making a difference, and how do we extend or expand upon those elements. And I think we know we have seen success at the schools at which this was piloted. Is that a result of the trajectory that those campuses were on anyways? Is it a fact that we replaced only about 15% of the teachers in those schools, so the majority are the same teachers? It's very hard to define, but one that we are intently looking at the moment, because resources are low, and we are going to have to make strategic decisions about which pieces to contain. But I will certainly point to, from my perspective, the biggest sign of success when you look at these schools, and we did do a process where teachers had to reapply, and we did put in all of these investments, and we are seeing those improvements in the classroom that are showing up in terms of student achievement, progress, and performance. But the biggest sign of success, in my opinion, is the perception of the teachers in terms of their sense of well-being in that school. I think Gary mentioned it before, if teachers are well cared for, then student achievement has a higher likelihood of transpiring. And so the signs that we have seen where teachers want to be in that school, that they are finding colleagues of common interest and passion, and the shift in culture in those schools is the one that I think we really have to nail, because that is what's making a difference.
I think it's very similar for us as well. We kind of have this idea, theory of action, that it's supports and rewards combined. That we can't just throw the money on the table and think that's going to make the difference. It's the PD and the support that they get in addition to that that makes the difference. So yes, the money is good and it's nice and it helps with that feeling, but it's really about the PD and getting teachers to be reflective and to change their practice so that they are better for kids. So it's really, and again, trying to measure it and show that you're successful is very difficult. We have an incredibly talented group of people who look at our program every year and try to tease those things out. And what we are seeing is that even though when the SLO team goes out on campuses and we get all the grumbling and the, I hate doing this, at the end, their qualitative data back on their surveys is that they think this is a really valuable process. And so again, making a difference with teachers will make the difference with students. And I think if we can prove that we're improving teacher effectiveness, then we're going to be able to show that we've been successful.
So we're bumped up against the boundary of our time, but there is one person patiently waiting to ask a question. Let's give you your shot at your question, and let's see which of the panelists goes for the jump ball here.
Okay, let me just frame it in two philosophical or theoretical kind of constructs that I have that get in the way of a lot of what we're talking about in general in this conference. Number one is, in my personal belief, the concept of merit pay is based on the presupposition that there will always be some good teachers that we should pay extra and some bad teachers that we should be getting rid of. And I believe that there is the possibility of an excellent teacher in front of every student if you do it the right way. And the idea of merit pay works against that. So keep that in mind for 1 second. And the other is we're talking about making effective teachers amongst those who are currently teachers. And we are looking at an entire nationwide program of new teachers coming in from programs where they are being given licenses because they paid a lot of money to go to school. Okay, and the reasons why they are in education quite often are because they get summers off and because it's easier than some of the other things that they do. And where does the role of turning our profession into a real profession that is treated like lawyers and doctors and starts with a base pay that is worthy of the kind of commitment we're asking of these educators? So it's kind of a big question there.
I think for us, we believe that we can have an effective teacher in front of kids. And our system isn't based on ranking teachers from high to low. Every teacher can get the incentive. Every teacher has the ability to gain, with student growth and show that they've done things. So that is one of the things we've been very purposeful in creating this program, is letting teachers know this isn't about saying you're good and you're bad. It's about making everybody better. So we've made a very purposeful choice in that we don't want to rank them in that way. Now we realize with teacher evaluation that may come eventually, but with the SLO process especially, every teacher can make it. As with new teachers, it's difficult. We know that happens, and I think that having mentors that go in and really do that intensive work with new teachers makes an incredible difference. And they not only help them become better, but they also counsel out the people that don't belong. And that's a hard thing, but it's good to have people who are available to do those kinds of things.
If I can just add, similarly, our budget is based on the assumption that every teacher could earn every award. So you can just imagine with bated breath, like when we get those results, because it's as I call it, it's the best worst case scenario, right? If every teacher earned $13,000 or their maximum award, that is fantastic. It would, shock our system in terms of finances, but I think intentionally we wanted to create a system where every teacher could do that. And we believe we have a competitive base salary, but this is really about rewarding excellence. So for those teachers that collaboratively are working together, veteran teachers, mentoring new teachers, teachers planning together, where they're able to drive, and the standard is fairly high. It's 2 standard errors of growth using the value-added system. For those teachers, we know we need to find a way to accelerate their salary opportunities so that they do stay in the classrooms.
Thank you.
Quickly, the chair's prerogative in the answer to that question. I think that first and foremost, anybody in this room knows that maybe the single most important career decision from the employer's perspective is who you hire. And there is no single simple way to say it other than that. It really means that we need to think differently about that hiring decision and think differently about the sources from which we're getting our teachers, much more critically. We may need, as folks who are doing the hiring, to start demanding more information about the sources. I think the second thing that I'd say, and I think this is important for you to ponder, it's an open-ended question as you go to lunch. This panel is about innovation and new ways to begin to think about the culture of continuous improvement, how it touches the classroom, how it touches the schoolhouse, how you build those systems. I think the tough question that we need to ask ourselves is, what in the current system, the status quo, is actually propelling us towards the results we desire? If we want to believe that improving teacher practice is not a zero-sum game, a matter of simply shuffling around the limited number of good ones so that we're covering the spaces that we need them in the most, if it's not going to be a zero-sum game and teachers aren't widgets that we can move around as replaceable parts, then what must we give away in the present practice in order to make things better? And with that, we offer you these folks as innovators, and I hope you can offer them your thanks for their presentations today.